Yeah.
Thomas Edwards, thank you for joining us today on Rehab My Soul. I am happy, so excited to see you again and chat with you
Yeah.
again. Last time we spoke, you shared your story with me, and it speaks for itself. So I just want to open up the floor, give you the mic, man, and just let you talk to us and tell us what you want to share.
I love it. And thanks so much for having me on. It's like it's always a privilege to be invited to share my story with the millions and maybe billions of stories that are out there. So I'm definitely in gratitude
Awesome.
for the chance, But for those who are listening and hearing this voice for the first time, I'm Thomas Edwards Jr. I'm known as many things. Originally, the professional wingman. I'm known as the playful coach. I'm a playfulness coach. I am a mentor. Sometimes people call me the chief happiness mentor of their lives. But but first and foremost, I'm a dad. I'm a dad. I'm a husband. I'm a son, uncle, cousin, brother. There's so many roles that I've played in my life, and it's interesting that I'm sharing it in this particular way because I actually just got back from the pool with my daughter. I was not in the pool. I was just at the pool because she wanted to be at the pool, and I figured I could get some work done. But she's fresh in my mind because there's so many roles that I play in my life, and at a certain point in my life, I was not able to manage and handle a lot of the responsibilities that came with the roles that I played in my life, and it nearly killed me. And so I'll bring you back to the days of the professional wingman. I started that company back in 2009. The idea literally came at a bar when I was helping a friend of mine score a date with someone he thought was really attractive, and he paid for my drinks and food for the rest of the weekend. And I thought, wow, I could probably make a business out of this, and so I did. And within a few months of hustling and grinding, I ended up getting some pretty great media attention. My first press hit was in the Wall Street Journal, and I went from servicing a few clients in Boston under the radar to all of a sudden soliciting invites for coaching from all around the world. We're talking Shanghai, Sierra Leone, South America, in the States, Miami, New York, LA. I mean, it was everywhere, and it seemed like it happened overnight, but I know it didn't. It just happened really quickly, and I rode that train. I really just wanted to be the best at what I did, which was really helping people find long-term relationships by being able to go anywhere using any platform, whether it was online or offline, to help them find success. I was known as the offline guy. And so for me, going out and showing people in real time what was preventing them from making those romantic connections happen, that was my bread and butter. That's what I wanted to be known as best in the world at. And I was able to prove that, not just through media, but also through my results. I mean, the company's still around, and it's been responsible for nearly 400 marriages and plenty of engagements, and probably at this point up to 1,000 relationships and ongoing. And so the results plus my story and just the personality that I carried, it just was a hit. And I was riding the wave, and I thought to myself, man, like, I'm living the dream. This is what my parents have always hoped for me. That's what they drove to me. It's like all about getting the security and having money and working hard, and then I can live the life that I want thereafter. And I really took that in. And my biggest moment in reflection was when I got invited to be on the Steve Harvey show. And that was a big deal because this guy was peaking. Like, I mean, peaking beyond peak. I mean, they had a best-selling book. That book got translated into a box office hit movie. He got his own talk show. I mean, the guy was just blowing up, and he wanted me on his show. That was a big deal. And so they flew me into Chicago. I absolutely crushed the segment. I mean, even he was impressed. Shook my hand and basically gave me a "well done, son," kind of applause. And I went and I started celebrating. I went to this rooftop bar in Chicago, and I was celebrating like I made it. I'm being recognized as best in the world. My clients are happy. I even found my one in my personal life and got married. I mean, clients are flying me out around the country to work with them. I mean, this is the life that I've heard from so many of my friends that they wish that they had. And I remember sitting down at this table, because I got a table and I was surrounded by people that I knew and I didn't know. And I was looking at the glass reflection of the table and I saw myself, and there was this unexpected sense of emptiness and a lack of fulfillment that hit me right after that realization. And it caught me off guard. I didn't know what it was, how to feel about it. Um, I didn't know how to talk about it, but it scared the crap out of me, and it overwhelmed me. And then realizing, I was like, wait, why am I not happy? Why am I not feeling fulfilled by this? And then realizing where I was, which is I was at the center of a party. I was like, you know what, let me forget about this. Let me just down this drink and get back to the party. And I did, and that was, you'll find out that was a recurring theme to how I approached life for quite some time. And I remember waking up the next morning and I was hungover for one, but then those feelings were still there, and I didn't know how to shake them. I didn't know how to talk about it. I didn't know how to manage them. I was raised where, such a way where we didn't talk about feelings in that way, and if I had an issue, it was up to me to figure out how to solve it. The idea of asking for help wasn't a part of my life strategy. And so I struggled a lot, went into depression, was heavy abuser of alcohol, got into drugs, surrounded myself with the wrong crowds. And this was happening kind of behind the scenes while everything was still continuing to look pretty good from the outside, because I found a way to try to hide my emotions as best as I could when the spotlight was on me, so to speak. And internally, I was an absolute mess. And my family, my wife saw that, and she was worried about me. And it went on, and then eventually, we moved I lived in New York with her, and then we moved from New York to LA. I was thinking I would run away from my problems, not thinking that they would follow me. And in fact, my problems became more accessible actually in LA, and it just really accelerated things. And then my wife came in about a few months into us moving to LA and said that she was pregnant. And I always call it the best, worst day of my life, because on one hand, it was the best day. I've always wanted to be a dad since as long as I can remember. And that for me was like such a big life-changing moment for me. And then on the other side, it was the worst day, because this identity that I had created for myself, the wingman that had all the cash and the prizes and just the adulation and the praise, all the things that I craved and thought I needed to have in order to be something, or be someone, that died that day. And with all the emotions that I was struggling with, to add grief to that wasn't a good thing. And so I ended up actively mourning the death of my identity for about a year and a half, just drowning myself in drugs and alcohol and escapism, and just not willing to face the reality of my life unfolding, and it got to a point where my wife came out of the bedroom one day and said, I love you, and this is not the marriage that I want to be in. Something needs to change, or I got to change something about the marriage. And I'm paraphrasing what she said. She said a lot of stuff that day. But the way she had said it made it, the way I internalized it was, I needed to make a change. And I knew that she was going to make a change with or without me. So I might as well, to really take a look at what's going on with me. And I just realized that like everything that I knew and I did brought me to this place. And this place was a very deep and dark pit. And I didn't have what I knew wasn't going to get me out of this deep, dark pit, and I was face to face with the reality that I could not figure this out on my own. And it was the first time where I realized I needed to get some outside support. And I remember this moment, and I call this moment, getting that extra life, getting that second chance. And I went all in on receiving support. Had two therapists. One was personal, and then the other one was for our marriage. I had a psychiatrist. I had a doctor, addiction doctor. I had a life coach. I wouldn't think he would call himself one, but I would call him that, because he did that for my life. I did meditation retreats, leadership retreats. I mean, I did all kinds of stuff, and my life was incrementally getting better. But every 80 or 90 days, something would trigger inside of me, and then I would just be a mess. And all that momentum I would create would fall apart, and I would looking back, I would call that version of myself the arsonist, because I would just build and then I would burn it all down just to try to build it back up again. And I was stuck in this cycle of building, burning, building, burning. And it led up to one day I'm still clean. This is January 12th, 2019. I'm still clinging on to this identity of the wingman. And at this point, I'm like resentful of the work. I just didn't want to do anymore. I was so disconnected from it, and I didn't have the courage or just the emotional intelligence at the time to understand that I could do something else. I was afraid that my identity would be lost if I made that shift. And so I'm clinging on to this, and I'm about to go work with a client. And I remember, getting myself together, and I'm about to leave the door. And I feel like in that moment, God blew that door shut because I didn't do it. And I said something. I told my wife, I was like, something feels like I shouldn't be going out tonight. And she was like, no, just go ahead. Like, just do your job and come back. Like, it's fine, And I was like, all right. And I go out and I walk into this bar that I'm meeting my client in, and I I black out, like without even having a drink of alcohol at the time. I just black out. And of course, in that time, there's stages where I was drinking, I was drugging, and I was avoiding, and I was escaping. And I remember when I finally came to clear consciousness, it was like 6 a.m. And I'm standing outside my apartment, and I'm like, what did I just do? And at this point, my wife made the strong choice of setting boundaries. She was like, listen, if you're coming home late, like, you can't be welcome here. Like, this is not a good example to set for our daughter. And so I broke that, and bless her, she held the boundary. She's like, you are not welcome here, you need to go. And I did. And I took myself right back to the bar and drowned myself in my sorrows and became an even bigger mess. And it was just a bad time. And this time I actually legit blacked out because I had so much alcohol. And I remember, and I believe, this is what I believe, January 13th, 2019, between that moment of blacking out and then when I woke up January 14th, 2019, I think God came in and was just like, you've had enough. Like, it's done. Like, it's time for you to wake up. And when I did wake up on the 14th, I actually woke up in darkness. Did not know where I was, did not know what I did not know who I was with. And it really represented that dark pit that I had created for myself all those years. And I remember walking out. I ended up going back to sleep, hoping that daylight would show up and I would be able to see where I was. And I ended up being at a hotel around the corner from my house. But I remember walking out of the hotel, and this is a very familiar, recognizable corner for me because I've lived at, near that intersection, and I've walked through that intersection for, many, many times. And I remember walking out and just not even recognizing at all where I was. And, the best way I can describe it is if you've seen The Matrix, when the first one, when Neo's unplugged and they're working on his body, and he asked Morpheus, why do my eyes hurt? And Morpheus says, you've never used them before. That was how I felt on that day. I felt like I was using new eyes, seeing a new world that I didn't live in before, that had different rules than how I was living before, where escapism was no longer a choice. And that freaked me out. I didn't know how I was going to be able to live in such a world. And over the course of 48 hours, I pretty much begged my way back into the house, and my wife reluctantly granted me that privilege. And I remember going back and seeing, my therapist, thinking like, what happened? Like, why am I doing this? Why am I just burning my life and destroying it? And it just came to that realization that like, I need to find a way to stop escaping, And so I ended up going into recovery program and being a part of fellowship groups that helped me basically like discover the more spiritual side of myself. And that was a huge shift in my life because it's all the things that I had learned through therapy and psychiatry and through my coach and all these weekend boot camps and retreats and programs that I took. It was almost like I had this hot cup of coffee and that was staying hot, boiling, and I couldn't drink it right? You can't drink a boiling cup of maybe some people can, but I could not drink a boiling cup of coffee. And the cap that was on it that would not release the steam was my need, my obsession with escaping. The drinking and the drugging, of course, they were terrible and they were harmful to my body and my mind and my spirit, but that was just a symptom of a bigger problem. Like I was not willing to be present with my emotions and with the reality of how I set up my life. And um, when I finally found the opportunity to just let that go, it was like the cap came off, the steam came out out of the cup, and I was able to finally truly digest all the things I had learned from so many of my mentors. All the things I learned through my life actually kicked in, and my life not only got better, it stayed getting better, and then it accelerated in terms of its transformation. And I'm about 3 to 6 months into this transformation, and things are looking great. I'm showing up better as a husband, a father, a business person, just a responsible human being, and a contributor to society as a sober person. And yet there was still something that was missing. I still wasn't feeling fully myself. And when I took a deep look into myself, I realized that I just wasn't having fun, was not enjoying my life, which is ridiculous to say in reflection because I have so many things that I get to enjoy. But at that time, all I saw was just responsibilities and duties and things that I had to do, which, by the way, like, I'll be the first to admit, like, I created these responsibilities. Like, I chose to be a husband. I chose to be a dad. I chose to be a business person. And while I was competent at those things, I was not enjoying them. And I knew if I couldn't figure out how to find joy in these things that I'm having to do every day and getting to do every day, it was only going to be a matter of time before the escapism would trigger and I would be out again. And who knows if I would be back. So I made a commitment to pursue what fun looked like for me in my life. And that was when I was reintroduced to my first true love, no offense to my wife, video games. Video games for me, even as a little kid, it was never a means to escape. Although my mom would be very grateful that I did play video games a lot and I kept my butt in the house, but and out of trouble. But for me, video games was a source of great creativity, of expression, of freedom, of connection. Because I played a lot with my friends. I was not the type to always be playing by myself. I always would go over to my friend's house, or I'd invite them over and we play and connect. I channeled my competitive spirit. I was always coming up with creative ideas of how to enjoy life, not just in video games, but outside too. It was a great, I remember looking back and realized I had such a well-balanced childhood in terms of my exposure to video games, but also my exposure to going out and playing and living out my life. And so video games was a resource, not a place to escape. And I never gave myself the opportunity to enjoy that in my adult life because I allowed programs, external programs, to tell me that video games shouldn't be in my life. Programs such as video games aren't cool. Video games are for kids. People who play video games are immature. You don't have enough time to play video games. All these things, that other people would say, but then I started to adopt it as my own story, and didn't allow it to be in my life. So I finally made that commitment, and I decided that I needed to find a way to structure my life so that way video games would stay in my life. And it allowed me to really tap into a dream I had since I was 18 years old, which was to become a professional gamer. Today we call it an esports athlete, and so I decided to pursue a part-time career in that. And I picked a game and I trained and I picked a tournament, and I ended up going to this tournament. And I remember going to the esports arena and just being surrounded by my people. Like it was unbelievable. And I went in there, I talked to people, I connected, we vibed about games, and I just had such an amazing time. And I ended up doing pretty well as a first timer. If I remember correctly, I was 33rd out of about 120 people. It was pretty good. But more importantly, I had so much fun. Like, I couldn't remember when I had that much fun before in a really, really long time. And I remember, leaving the arena and I was like, man, like, I wish my life was like this, that I could just like train and have fun and enter a tournament, not care about the outcome, and still have this incredible experience. Like, I wish my life was like a game. And then that's when the light bulb had hit. And I was like, what if I did make life a game? And so I took back all the things that I learned in my life, all the things I learned in getting out of the darkness. And I took my academic knowledge, which actually is in video game design and production. That's what I originally wanted to do with my life. And I finally was able to put that degree to work. If mom's hearing this, she's probably really proud. And created a game design over personal transformation. And I was like, wow, like, if people are in a state of playfulness and they're having fun doing things, imagine the potential of performance and growth and connection and happiness people would feel, especially in a world like today, where, I mean, all you if you don't allow, if you don't force yourself, like, you'll just be drowned in sorrow and sadness and fear. Like, this is the equalizer to that, and I was thinking back to the first game I ever played, which was Super Mario Brothers, and how, when I was on my last life playing Mario, it was so stressful because I just didn't want to die. I didn't want Mario to die. So I'd like avoid every challenge, every pit, and I would just try to get to the end just so I can get to the next level. But I felt like that was such an appropriate way to describe how a lot of people live their lives. They're just trying to survive so they can just make it to the end, just so they can wake up and do the same exact thing over again. And how psychologically something shifts when you get that extra life, that one up, and how all of a sudden you don't go from this, you don't think you need to survive. Now you get to explore, you can take your time, you can take risks and challenges, because if Mario does fall in that pit or he gets bounced by Koopa, not only do you have that extra life, like, you have the feedback now to know how to overcome that challenge. But the greatest thing about that whole process is you're playing a game. And so when you're playing a game, you automatically are going to try again because you're having so much fun. And I feel like we forget that games were not intentionally designed for us to win. They're designed for us to have fun. And then winning becomes a byproduct of playing the game, because you need to have some direction most times. And I realized that for so long, I was living out someone else's dreams of success being the key to my happiness. And I thought to myself, like, that actually almost killed me. What if I just flipped it and focused on my happiness being the gateway to my success? And it really just changed everything. I thought it was just an amazing effect that psychological shift would take. And I thought, oh, like, that is an effect when you get the extra life, the one up effect. And so I realized in that moment that I had something in my hands that actually could be my legacy, where I could really help people transform the way they show up in their lives, not driven by success, thinking that's going to make them happy, but the idea that their life is meant to be happy right now. And that could be the greatest gateway, I mean, the gateway to their greatest successes. And since then, I've been just hell bent on putting this idea in front of so many people, that playfulness is, what I believe, an elite form of mindfulness that can give you access to so much of your human potential, both physically, mentally, but also spiritually as well. And there's research and science there to prove that. But also, I have my personal experience and the experience of my clients to also show that it's such an effective way to live life, the kind of life that people do really, I believe that a lot of people want to live, which is full of happiness, joy, freedom, but also meaning and purpose. And so, that is the long version of how we got here today.
I love it. I love it. I never get tired of hearing that story.
Thank
Oh
you.
man, I
You've
love it.
already, you've heard it a couple of times, so it's good to hear that.
Yeah, it is so awesome. So there were so many things in there that I feel would be amazing talking points, only because I think so many of us can relate to that phase at some point of having outwardly everything that we said that we wanted, but still not feeling full, you know?
Yeah, yeah,
So it was crazy when you said, on top of all the things that you were feeling, you added grief to that because you
Mm,
grieved. Like, talk to me about that a little bit more.
yeah. Well, I was not in a state during that time where I was paying attention to what my soul had to say. I was so driven by my self-centered ego, and it was dictating my life. And so my ego, which I do call the wingman, right? That is the identity that was created. That was how my ego came to be. Didn't have any boundaries, you know? And so when there was that reality that that part of me needed to die because I was going to become a dad, that more responsibility was coming into my life, and that my life was actually changing, not from this like theoretical philosophical state,
Right. Like
perspective,
some
but
real
from
life stuff.
some real life stuff. My ego could not handle it, and because it didn't have any boundaries, it transformed into what I call the ultra ego. This is the ego run riot without boundaries. And that's what led me deeper into escapism, deeper into drug and alcohol abuse, and the grief was, my soul my soul was the one that knew the reality, right? My soul saw this a long time ago. And it was trying to talk to my ego and say, ego, like, you gotta let this go. And if you know anything about the ego does not like to die. The ego does not like to let go. And it's willing to do anything it possibly can do to survive. And what's really messed up about the ego is it runs on automated programs. So it runs, you're not even aware that it's running. But the worst thing about it is it's not even aware that it's killing the host, right? It's killing the host that holds the ego in order for it to survive. So the ego, the ultra ego in my life was willing to kill my body, right? Not realizing that if I died, that it would die itself. Like, that's how deep the ego can run if not
Wow.
having boundaries. And so that grief was what my ego was resisting, right? And when your ego is in resistance and it needs some type of external expression, what it does is it throws a tantrum. No different than, what my 4-year-old would do. But as an adult, they're more severe. They're more
Mhm.
sophisticated.
Yeah.
And oftentimes they're less overt than just kicking and screaming like my daughter would do, right? And so we have many ways in which we can harm ourselves. And in my case, harm me. But it was really all it was an adult-sized tantrum that lasted upwards of 2 years, and there was no end to it because there were no boundaries. There was no higher purpose or spiritual boundary that could hold the ego in check. But my soul was constantly, and by the way, this is all in reflection. I was not aware of this, at the time it was happening. But the whole time, my soul and God was trying to communicate with me in such a way to get me to realize that my life was changing and it was okay to let go. But I was so driven by my ego and the fear of losing that I couldn't hear it and I couldn't see it. So that grief, I held on to it. And that's what extended that timeline of just me being depressed and um, just really abusive to myself and hurtful to others.
Wow. Wow. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
I your story is so poignant in that the struggle with the ego is something I think we all, when we're able to acknowledge it, we're all able to recognize, okay, this is the struggle for survival. What part of me, because the ego is beneficial in its healthiest form.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But the thing is, we're walking around with unhealthy forms of ego because of that programming that we have on a subconscious level. And so, the work that, do you do any work with your clients to work on that type of thing, or is the
Yeah.
focus? Okay, tell me
it's
about that.
it's yeah it's so the first principle of the one up effect, because this is really what it covers, is to accept your character. And your character has 4 dimensions. It's your ego, your soul, your superpower, and your fulfillment. And in the dimension of the ego, you have to understand that there are things that your ego does that helps you, and there are things that your ego does that doesn't help you. And oftentimes those things don't go, those things that the things that the ego does that doesn't help you, those characteristics, sometimes called character defects, they don't go away. They're still present, and they can be activated anytime. But the key is to have awareness of what those defects of character are. So that way you can work on being able to manage the limit those defects from coming out. And so if you don't know what they are, then they're going to come out at the worst times. They don't come out at the best times.
No.
And even if they do come out at the best times, you're not really going to notice it because you're so into the fact that you're having a great moment. So you're like, it's fine. Right. But in moments where you could hit that next level, we're talking about now we're talking about self-sabotage, right?
Yeah.
Because in order for you to level up in your life, there is some part of your ego that does need to die in order for you to be able to not just get to that next level, but to stay there. And your ego, once again, does not like it. And so when we talk about self-sabotage, that's what's really happening. Your ego is allowing your ego's defects show up prominently to stall you and get in the way, and so it'll always be present, but it's up to you to have awareness of knowing what those are and then having the tools to prevent it from coming up as often as possible, right? And so that is a big part of the work that we do, because you need to have awareness of these dimensions of your character, so because your ego and your soul got it. Your ego and soul, we would love to live in a world where we rise above our ego and our ego doesn't exist, right? And we'll have many ego deaths in our lives, but our ego doesn't completely go away, right? Like there's maybe a handful of people that we know throughout history that has lived without an ego or achieved that final ego death, right? So it's for the average person, it's very unlikely that you're going to lose your ego. That being said, now that you understand, if you're willing to accept that, then you have to be able to find a way where your ego and your soul can play nice. They got to be able to collaborate. I like to call it play. They got to be able to play together, because when they're able to play together, the ego feels included, and the ego then shows up at its best. The only time the ego shows up at its worst is if it feels like it's going to be abandoned, right? And it's like, if I were to not listen to my child's going to find a way for me to get there and to get her attention. And it may not necessarily be in the best way, right?
Wow.
But that's her way of trying to get my attention.
Yeah.
So I got to take a look at that for myself. And I think we all have that capacity. That has never changed from when we were kids.
Wow. Wow, wow, wow. I love the personification of the ego. I love when we're able to separate it, because it doesn't, the vilification of it all isn't necessary. It's just, this is the function and this is the programming for the function.
Yeah, because
So,
when you can identify the character of your ego, it gives you some humanity. It gives it some humanity, right? Which means, so with that humanity comes compassion,
right.
right? Some understanding, and then eventually acceptance, and then love, right? Because when you get to that place of acceptance of all parts of who you are,
Yeah.
not trying to just use your strengths to overshadow or hide your weaknesses,
Right.
but to embrace all those parts, then you come to love those things about you.
Yeah.
Because I'll tell you what, as much as we may not like those things about our ego, they may have been also the very things that have kept you alive up to this point.
Yes.
And we got to be able to respect and accept and appreciate that.
Yeah.
Right. Maybe not in the ways that we have wanted it to, but it still did it. Right. And so by being able to have that compassion for it, it actually allows the ego to calm down and say, okay, I'm being acknowledged. I'm being loved. I'm being paid attention to. I don't need to come out and tantrumize. I don't need to come out and call for attention, because I'm getting that love from you, from the host,
Right.
And it's it's a beautiful thing when you get to a place of acceptance, because then you become fully responsible and powerful in how you can then change your future.
Wow.
Yeah.
Awesome. So tell me about the structure of the work that you do. Are you still getting flued out all over the place to work with your clients?
not Not yet, not yet. You know, it definitely is coming now that we're seeing, you know, some, you know, restrictions being
For
lifted
sure.
for sure. You know, but you know, my mission is a little bit different than the professional wingman in the sense, you know, I did a lot of one-on-one work, um, you know, because I had to. I was going out, physically going out with my clients, you know, and I was able
Right.
to do a really good job at that. But for me, this I feel like this mission is a lot bigger, you know, and so you know, I put it down on paper, and I look at it often, and it's in the next 10 years, I want 5 million people impacted by the one up effect,
Let's
you know, and
get it.
so
Let's get it.
yeah,
Yes.
and so in order for me to be able to do that, every decision that I make has to have that in mind. So I mean, I can't impact, you know, 5 million people one-on-one over the
Of
next 10
course.
years.
Yeah.
Right. And so, you know, I have programs, I still work with people one-on-one, but that's just on a very unique basis. But I do have coaching programs that work in groups. I have businesses that I work with that allows them to take the philosophy and the methodology and be able to implement it with their team and with their company. It's a great way to instill a healthier and more playful, and studies have shown and results have shown a more productive culture, that promotes production and wellness, you know, at the same time, not
Mm.
production at the sacrifice of
Of
wellness,
wellness.
and not
Exactly.
wellness at the sacrifice of production either. That's always kind of
That's true.
the, we always feel like we need to sacrifice something, but the two can coexist. You just got to work harder. And I mean, and I use that term loosely. You know, for me, work and play are synonymous, right? So I can even say play harder towards finding out what that looks like, you know, and this is where like the conversation about balance comes into play. Like balance is a great term because everyone uses it, but I don't believe that we're necessarily looking for balance, because balance is a moment in which we're able to manage all things at the same time. But the truth is, that moment passes the moment that moment happens because we're
Right.
constantly doing this. This is not balance. This is trying to balance, right?
Mm-hmm.
But this is balance. And we don't have the capacity to be able to do that because our lives are ever changing. And so my philosophy is based on work life synergy, where our lives, you know, are the sum of the parts of our lives are just so much bigger than life itself. You know, the work that we're doing, the life that we're living, the things that are in our lives that are important, they're so much bigger than what we even realize it is, you know? And the only reason why I'm able to say this from personal experience is because I have a daughter. So I know that my life is so much bigger than what I'm able to see, because there's a future that's brewing as we speak in the other room, you know?
Right.
And so everything comes together. There's no separation and compartmentalization between work and play and family and friends. It's all cohesive. We all draw, we draw energy from all those things, allowing us to show up and look at our lives and to feel a sense of fulfillment. You know, one doesn't depend on the other. They all work together. And so if we, and this is once again, like, it's a very different perspective than I feel like a lot of people have been raised on. And so there's always going to be some resistance to the idea that success, you know, success isn't the way to happiness. This is, you know, like,
Right.
I get it. This is what most programming will tell you. The media will tell you this too, right? There's so many more search results on how to be more productive and how to be successful than there are on how to be happy,
Right. Yeah.
you know? But that's what we
Yeah.
want, is how to be happy, right? And I think what makes this the one up effect different is I do research and I know all the physical and the scientific research that's done to show what things you can do to help yourself be happier, and how going after those external things don't make you happy. But it's very rare that you can come across an actual methodology that you can implement, a way of being that you can practice, that shows and leads you to living that happier, more productive life. Usually you just get like a couple tips of like, you know, drink more tea, or
I
or like
know.
move your body more, right? And those things are true.
Yeah.
Like sleep more, right? Like those things are true, but they're not like the one and done solution, right? Denise, when you're trying to change your life, that means you change your life, not just your sleep.
Right.
Sleep is just one component of a bigger picture that you're trying to change, you know. And so yeah, I find the one up effect to be the most comprehensive solution towards being able to feel fulfillment in all areas of your life.
That's awesome. And sometimes people are so out of whack just being thrown around by life where we need to start with sleep
Yeah.
before we can get to the more fun, you know? Because sometimes
Mm-hmm.
sleep is hard to come by for a myriad of reasons. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
it's this living, this happiness, getting this peace is such a holistic effort. It's not just like you said, it can be one or two switches that affect, you know, a line of other things in the future. But yeah, it's very holistic. You have to actually make a change. I know for sure I am not having enough fun in my life. I mean, the
Mm.
pandemic has really slowed my activity levels down, which affect other things that it
Mm-hmm.
snowballs, and before you know it, you're not doing anything for yourself. You're not having fun. You're not getting sunlight. So,
Yeah.
not to mention seasonal depression. So I'm happy it's
Mm-hmm.
springtime.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, having more fun is so important. I found um I found that in my life on many different levels. I was able to manifest quicker, more effortlessly just by unplugging for a bit or plugging
Yeah.
into the sun, really. So, but yeah, well, thank you so much for sharing your story and all of that pertinent information. Where
Yeah.
can we find you online?
Yeah. So if you want to connect and learn more about the one up effect, this methodology, maybe even work together, you can go to thomasedwardsjr.com/podcast and you can get all the information there. If you want to pre-order a copy of my book, The One Up Effect, it's actually right now being edited and will be in production soon. It's going to be published by Morgan James either later this year or early 2023. You can still pre-order your copy early and get advanced chapters when those become available. You can go to oneupeffect.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is awesome.
You are so welcome. Your media training is awesome. I love it. That man has told that story before, baby.
I
But
I'm
it's
very
so
I'm very
awesome.
fortunate, very fortunate to have had the experience that I've had. So that's
For
why
sure.
I mean, thank Wingman for that. Wingman a lot of allowed this. So
For
props to
sure.
Wingman.
Awesome. All right. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.